Okay, right now in the YouTube window and just waiting for it to connect to YouTube, to connect to the Zoom situation so that our YouTube link is correct. And now I'm taking that down. Okay. Can everybody hear? Give a thumbs up if you can hear us. Are you able to hear? Perfect, perfect. Okay, because everyone's muted. So I'm going on to the share screen to provide the text, and off we go. So there we are. This is the fourth chapter of Maimonides of the Rambam on the section of character development, what's called Deos. And this is a fascinating chapter. We have only got 30 minutes. Truly speaking, there's a lot of info here, so I want to move through it so we can give everybody a perspective. I'm just going to look for the spotlight so I can show you where I'm reading. So I don't see the spotlight button, but we'll just read together. From the top of the page, you see the big one on the English side, and you'll see an aleph on the Hebrew side. This is the Rambam. This is Maimonides chapter number 4, which talks about being healthy, keeping healthy. So our moms told us this when we were little, that we should drink a glass every day, a glass of milk every day. A glass of milk a day keeps the doctor away. But we're going to find out now if Maimonides agrees with that, or perhaps he doesn't agree with that. And the first chapter we're going to read, the first halacha, aleph, we'll read in the Hebrew, because of the fact that the body has to be healthy and sound. And this is one of the ways of God. In other words, God wants us to look after our bodies. You know, people might say that it's not necessarily a matter of Torah or halacha to be healthy, to go and do your exercise. Make sure to get some exercise or go to gym, keep the blood moving through the arteries. But it is, you know why? Because you can only serve Hashem if you are healthy. Chas v'shalom, God forbid, if somebody is ill, they can't serve Hashem. I'm reading the third of the Hebrew lines, going there from the bottom. It's not possible to understand the Creator and to study Him and connect to Him if He's sick. Therefore, Torah tells us to keep ourselves away from things that harm our physical body and our physical health. So being healthy is a Jewish law. It's not just a trend. It's not just something that's a fad or important. And it's not only what the doctor's ordering, it's what the rabbis should be ordering and being an example to as well. Therefore, people should accustom themselves to things which are healthy and make them stronger. And the Rambam starts to list out in this chapter, which has the paragraphs in Maimonides, as you're going to find out, are called halachot. Each one's called a halacha. So there's 23 of them in this chapter. Some are bigger, some are smaller. And they will outline various different aspects of human behavior. You know, the regular things that we do each day, our biological function and our necessities, eating, drinking, relieving ourselves, sleeping, intimate relationships, exercise, all of those things that we do to nurture, protect, look after, and strengthen our physical body. So these are they. So the Rambam gives it as a bit of a table of contents for the chapter. I'm going in on the Hebrew side from Va'elu Hain. That's about the midway through that paragraph. On the English side, it will be where it says they are as follows. One should not eat unless he is hungry. So in other words, it's not healthy to indulge or overeat. The Rambam will explain further down even more so why. And he shouldn't drink unless he is thirsty. So yeah, that good old saying that our body will tell us if we need to eat. Our body will tell us if we need to drink. And lastly, one should not put off relieving ourselves. So that paragraph, that halacha, ends off with the directive that it's not a healthy thing at all if we don't relieve ourselves regularly and when we need to. So so-called holding oneself in, as we were accustomed to calling it when we were children, is an unhealthy thing to do. That's for people running, whether it is schools or restaurants or facilities or homes, have to make sure that there are enough bathrooms in a place, because people have to be able to, obviously in a modest and hygienic way, relieve themselves as often as possible. It's very unhealthy if people have to wait. And now the Rambam moves to unpack these various different subjects. He moves firstly to the concept of eating. It was already alluded to, so I've got number 2 at the top of the page. One should not eat until his stomach is full. So the Rambam is tackling the topic of overeating. One should not overeat. Rather, a person should stop when he has eaten to close to 3/4 of full satisfaction. You know, it's quite fascinating that a lot of what we're learning and reading over here will make a lot of sense and appeal to us. There'll be some things which we'll find a little bit strange or quaint, and that is because times change. It might have been mentioned by other rabbis in the previous shiurim that in the times of the Rambam were different. So some of the health regulations, some of the health recommendations or halachas that are articulated here are not necessarily the same, and others are age-old wisdom that find their way into any sensible eating plan or diet. So here they are. One should drink only a small amount of water during the meal and mix that with wine. I think today people in nutrition believe very much that drowning our food is not a good idea. The enzymes, the digestive acids don't do well when people, so to speak, wash down their food too much, unless it is a particular kind of beverage like wine or lemon juice that has actually an ability to aid the natural digestive process. When the food begins to be digested in his intestines, then drink what's necessary. However, he should not drink much water even once food is digested. If I'm not mistaken, one of the early fad diets, Fit for Life, very much ran along this principle that one should try not to eat and drink at the same time. And here we have a paragraph by the Rambam. I'm going to put it right at the top so you can see where I'm reading. I'm not sure why on my other Zoom account I have that spotlight that I can put under the words. Not sure where he's gone on this one. I'll check with the organizers of Daily Rambam. One should not eat until he has checked himself thoroughly and does not need to relieve himself. So the Rambam wants us to make sure that we do not need to relieve ourselves when we eat. We should check before eating that has taken place already. And likewise, there should be a certain amount of exercise that takes place or exertion before eating. So it seems that Maimonides is in tandem with all those people you find running out there doing the exercise early in the morning, that it's a good idea to get the blood going and do some sweat-producing tasks before moving into sitting down and having a meal. And then I'm ending off paragraph number 2. Afterwards, he should wait a short while to eat. So a bit of exertion before we start to eat seems to be the Rambam's, how would you call it? The Rambam's take. It's quite interesting. You know, a few months ago, the beginning of lockdown, we were told we can't do exercise in the streets. And then came that rule, if you remember, from 6 to 9, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., we were allowed to go out there and exercise. I found it quite atmospheric because you'd go into the streets and you found everybody coming out of their homes as if it was a resort. And there was a certain atmosphere to it, to the routine of everybody, you know, finding each other in the street, doing the exercise. Now in number 3, the Rambam talks about eating in a calm kind of way. In other words, you know, I know that cocktail parties in the last in the last few decades, maybe even more than that, seem to have become very popular to stand up and eat. You know, people walk around at a function or a party. Many places here in the Rambam and in the Talmud talk about the importance of sitting down to eat properly. Our mothers and grandmothers were strict on that. Sit down and eat. We probably were often told when we hurried into the kitchen to catch a peck, you know, halfway out the fridge, eating, snipping whatever's inside there. The Torah says, halacha says, one should eat while seated. And even better, reclining on his left side. This should remind you of Pesach. Remember that we're instructed to lean to the left on Pesach, not the right, because that lines up our digestive system properly. And a person should not walk about, ride, exert himself, subjecting the body to other startling influences or take strolls until the food is digested. And the Rambam gives a warning. Last sentence of number 3. Anyone who takes a stroll or exerts himself after eating brings serious and harmful illnesses upon himself. So there's a very strong view by the Rambam. Sit down, relax with your food, don't walk around, and there shouldn't be exertional movement. And here with number 4, halacha number 4, the Rambam is turning to the very important concept of sleep. that we have to be very careful that we get the correct amount of sleep. And we do hear this often, that a day makes up 24 hours. The Rambam says it's sufficient for a person to sleep 1/3 of this period, 8 hours. What was that old saying? Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy and wealthy and wise. So the Rambam wants 8 hours of our 24 invested in the very precious concept of sleep. So switch off those devices. Nowadays with everybody having their tablets and their iPhones and their smartphones around, there's always a danger you're going to pick up that thing and look at it for 2-3 hours, and that will deprive you of some valuable sleep. So don't do that. You need 8 hours. The Rambam also wants those 8 hours to be the last 8 hours before sunrise. So you see, it should be towards the end of the night. So there should be 8 hours from the beginning of going to sleep until sunrise. Thus, he should rise from his bed before sunrise. The position you sleep in is very important. That's discussed in halacha number 5, that one should not sleep face down. People who suffer from, I think they call it sleep apnea. So they discuss a lot how sleep and the way in which we sleep can affect. It's not just the quantity of sleep, the 8 hours we spoke about in halacha 4, but the quality of the sleep, which is dependent on perhaps the position. One should not sleep face down or on our backs, but on the left side at the beginning of the night and the right side at the end of the night. One should also not go to sleep shortly after eating. There should be a 3 or 4 hour break. I think that that's in tandem with conventional and modern views by health counselors with regard to sleep. The Rambam seems to be opposed to sleeping during the day. So make sure that all the shiurim are interesting, that no rabbis or teachers put you to sleep during the shiur, because Maimonides doesn't want you to sleep during the day. I'm sure you all heard the story of the guy that fell asleep, and the rabbi asked someone to wake him up. He said, wake him up. And the guy says to the rabbi, you wake him up, rabbi, because you put him to sleep. We're up to halacha number 6, back to nutrition and eating. The Rambam says laxative foods such as grapes, figs, mulberries, pears, etc. Are very important, but however, they shouldn't be eaten with the main meal, but before the main meal. And constipating foods at the end of halacha 6, such as pomegranates, quinces, apples, a certain kind of pears, not sure how you pronounce that, Christumenian. The Hebrew side says Christumelin should be eaten immediately after the meal and not in quantity. So the Rambam seems to want the kind of foods that cause the digestive system to go into motion, eaten as an introduction to the meal, and the kind of foods that sort of slow things down should be eaten as a suffix at the end of the meal. And somehow that balances out the system. We're going to see the Rambam's very keen on people being, I know the Americans call it being regular, when the digestive system is working properly and a person has the correct amount of bowel movements and is passing water sufficiently. So the Rambam throughout this chapter associates a healthy digestive system with health in general. And in number 7, the Rambam makes the point that if you're going to eat different kinds of food, especially those heavy proteins, that those are the kind of foods that are a little bit hard on the body to deal with, you should move from a lighter one to a heavier one. So in other words, it should be a gradual step-up process. So a person who desires to eat poultry, I'm reading from the beginning of 7. If you want to eat poultry and meat in the same setting, eat the poultry first, because poultry is lighter. Similarly, if he desires to eat eggs and poultry, eggs comes before poultry. If you're going to eat meat of large cattle or small cattle, so let's say you're going to have veal and then you're going to move to a more different type of beef, the smaller meat should be, or the lighter kind of meat first. And there's the rule at the end of number 7. Last sentence, last line and a half. I'll read it in Hebrew as well. La'olam yagdim adam davar hakal. You should always eat the lighter fare first, and eat the heavier fare afterwards. So it seems Maimonides is suggesting that what should happen is your body should get used to the tougher form of eating, the lighter thing, and then move on to the heavier thing. In number 8, Ches, the Rambam says that summer and winter are not the same. In the human body, our bodies respond to the seasonal changes. Our digestive system and digestive health also does. And therefore, in summer, one should eat unseasoned foods without many spices and use vinegar. Spices apparently make it harder for people when it's hot. However, with regard to winter, it's the opposite. He calls it the rainy season, but Yemois HaGashamim, the rainy season. I know that that Gauteng is a bit different. We strangely get our rain in summer, but in the rest of the world, and our Cape Town friends, I know we're lucky to have Cape Town participants here too. I think you guys do get your rain in winter, the normal time for rain as it is in the world. So during the winter season, one should eat a lot of spicy foods, and that according to the Rambam. In number 9, the Rambam starts to talk about foods which are extremely harmful. And I want to remind all of us that the truth is things have changed. You know, the composition of food, the constitution of food, the way it's manufactured in factories or in private homes has changed so much over the centuries that it's not necessarily exactly the same. For example, what you'll see here is the biltong manufacturers and the butcheries will not be happy with what the Rambam has to say about biltong, but it's not necessarily the same in today's day and age. There are foods which are extremely harmful, and it's proper that people should never eat them. Large fish that are aged and salted, cheese aged and salted, truffles, mushrooms, meat which is aged and salted, wine from the press, cooked food which has been left over until it produces an odor. So yes, leaving food out and getting bacteria, that's a very big problem. And the Rambam says the telltale is a bad smell or a bitter taste. So these should be left alone. In the next paragraph, the Rambam moves to foods which are also harmful, but he says a lower level of harm than the ones he mentioned and listed out in the higher paragraph. And I'm going to read the last line of the paragraph. You should not eat them regularly as is main fare. So yeah, again, dietitians will say the same thing to you. If it's something you like, you know, you like your chocolate, have some. But I mean, think about, don't live on it. It shouldn't be breakfast, lunch, and supper. But it may be a healthy, how would you call it? It might be not healthy, but a snack that you can indulge in sometimes. And then the Rambam continues in this paragraph to list various types of fish, cheese, and milk. And he feels that if it's been around for a while, more than 24 hours after the milking, it's not good. I'm reading the middle of the paragraph. All of these are harmful foods. It is fitting you should eat them very sparingly and only in the rainy season, abstaining entirely in the summer. And of these, horse beans, lentils alone should not be eaten either in summer or winter. Squash can be eaten in the summer season. So again, you'd have to find out with regard to different foods in today's day and age. I'm bringing halacha 10 to the top of the page. Today's day and age is not necessarily the same. Just to mention, a friend of mine, a dear friend who has been in the baking industry for many, many years, he's now in his senior years, like he always mentions, how different it was in the days of old. Bakers took a long time to bake bread. It was more or less like the sourdough bread that's become popular today. And it's not just that it took longer to rise and they utilized less yeast, but a lot of what happens to the bread as it waits and matures is makes it easier for the body to deal with. Whereas the bread that is manufactured today with so many quick fix chemicals to make it look puffy and big and quick is not necessarily the good stuff. And we have to be careful because our bodies respond to the fact that it has not matured properly. So number 10 continues, there are foods which are harmful but less so than these: waterfowl, young pigeons, date bread roasted in oil or kneaded in flour. I'm going to move a little bit quick because our time budget, we're down to only 10 minutes to go. But at the end of 10, again, a man who is wise overcomes his desires and is not drawn by appetites and eats nothing of the aforementioned unless he needs them for medical reasons. So the Rambam again recommending that we should be careful. In 11, the Rambam talks about not having too much fruit. Again, fruit were different all over the world. So I know that in certain parts of Russia, our forebears didn't see a potato for hundreds of years. If I'm not mistaken, South Africa never had corn. It sounds funny that corn is a staple diet of millions of South Africans today, the majority of South Africans. Yet if I'm not mistaken, corn was brought from overseas not that long ago, maybe 2 centuries ago or 1 century ago, whatever it is. So food has moved around the world. And so a lot of this is based on how things are digested, what kind of constitution of the food, etc., etc. So I don't think it's a blanket rule where the Rambam says in 11 one should always avoid fruit, not eat them in quantity. But we do know that dried fruits, and there's a lot of sugar, natural sugars in fruits, which can be healthy when eaten sparingly. But if you start to overindulge, there can be trouble. So maybe the best thing is to remember always the middle path. Honey and wine, number 12, quite interesting, are harmful to the young and wholesome for the old. Certainly this applies in the rainy season. In summer, one should eat 2/3 of what he eats in winter. So the Rambam says, tone down what you're eating in the summer months, the body needs a bit of a break from the concept of eating and digesting. So number 13, the Rambam wants to say in Yud Gimel, we mentioned it, we alluded to it briefly at the beginning, but in number 13 he unpacks it more. A person should always try to have loose movements throughout his life, tending slightly in the direction of diarrhea. So in other words, the bottom line is not, God forbid, he should have the diarrhea, but the Rambam says the system needs to be loose. It needs to be moving and working. And look at his wording, because the Rambam was a doctor. This is a cardinal principle in medicine. If a person suffers from constipation or has difficulty moving his bowels, serious diseases will beset him. So the Rambam says, do whatever you can. Go off to Dischem. We should be selling some advertising time over here. And get all those things, those supplements that keep you moving, whether it's the prune juice or the healthy stuff, because the Rambam says that if the system is moving and we are relieving ourselves properly, that is a very good and healthy thing. He suggests that people in their senior years should drink honey diluted with hot water in the morning, wait approximately 4 hours, and then eat their meal. And this also has the ability to loosen the bowels. Number 14, halacha 14, Yudalad, is the good old principle of exercise. And here we see a very interesting thing that the Rambam says. Exercise is so important that it can actually undo the harm of some unhealthy foods. So it is so important to exercise. I'm going to read the Hebrew side as well for Yudalad. Another big principle with regard to physical well-being. If a person exerts himself and exercises, and makes sure not to overeat, overindulge in food, and his insides are so-called loose, and so he is digesting properly, no disease, no illness will come upon him. His strength will become stronger. Here the Rambam says, even if you eat the wrong stuff, a bit of exercise can negate the harm that the wrong stuff will do. Number 15 actually gives that same concept the other way around. If you don't exercise, if you're idle and you don't exercise, the dietitian is not going to be able to help you. Whoever is idle and does not exercise and doesn't move his bowels when he has the need, or is constipated, even if he eats the proper foods and takes care to follow the rules of medicine, he will still be full of pain for all his days, and his strength will fade away. And again, a take on overeating is like poison to a person's body, the main source of all illness. Most illnesses which afflict a man are caused by harmful foods or by filling his belly and overeating even healthy foods. And here we go, he quotes Shlomo HaMelech. This was implied by Solomon in his wisdom. This comes from Mishlei, the book of Proverbs. Shomer piv u'lashono. A man has to guard his mouth from eating harmful food or eating to become too full. So again, I mean, it's if a person knows when to close the meal, that is a very important part of life. Okay, number 16 talks about bathing, which is very different for us. It's important to, I say it's different because the human custom has changed. You know, in today's day and age, we all have baths and showers in our homes. Once upon a time, people could, how would you call it, take a little basin and have a splash, but they didn't seem to have full baths or showers in the home. And they used to go off to the bathhouse and they would have a very intense kind of bathing experience where the entire body would be placed in water. And the Rambam says this must happen at least once in 7 days. I'm sure that there was more washing going on in the intervals, but in bathing the entire body, if you see in the middle paragraph, you should bathe the entire body in hot and not scalding water. And the Rambam talks about the temperature of the water. It should start off very hot and one should start to cool it down. And it should be done when a person is not hungry and when he doesn't need to go to the bathroom, etc., etc. So that's number 16, all about bathing. And number 17 is about coming out of the bathhouse. There shouldn't be a huge contrast in temperature change. So when one leaves the bathhouse, he needs to cover himself and make sure that there aren't undue temperature changes. The contrast in temperature is going to affect the body. Number 18 talks about a strange custom they used to have in the old days called hakaza, or bloodletting. One of the ways that people would cure the body is by letting blood. And the Rambam talks in number 18 all the rules of bloodletting. It shouldn't be done too much. It shouldn't be done when it's too cold or when it's too hot. It shouldn't be done when a person hasn't eaten enough. Which brings us to 19. We're now talking about intimate relationships and the amount at which a person indulges in sexual relationships. In 19, he says, semen is the strength of the body and its life force and the light of the eyes. And the Rambam says that one must be careful not to emit too much of it. So in other words, how would you call it? An obsessive amount of sexual activity is not healthy for the body of a man. And he says this is what Solomon implied when he said, Al titain lanoshim chaylecha. Do not give your strength to women. That comes from Proverbs 31:3. And he starts to list a whole bunch of things. Whoever is steeped in relations, and by steeped, I think the Rambam is talking here about a very obsessive kind of extent. Not really what common people would do in today's day and age, but a very obsessive extent is simply very, very unhealthy for the human body. But in a normal way, it's important to remind ourselves, because there are tremendous myths floating around in the world about human relationships and intimacy, and certainly religious Judaism's attitude to it. Done correctly and properly, it is considered to be a healthy aspect of human life, not frowned upon in any kind of way from the Torah whatsoever. So therefore, I'm reading this part, a person must take care in this matter if he wishes to live in good health. He should only engage in intimacy when the body is healthy and strong, etc., etc. So in the next paragraph, he shouldn't engage in intimacy on a full or empty stomach. His digestive system must be healthy when he approaches intimacy. It requires energy. Nothing's changed. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And so the Rambam wants us to know that this is a time that we should feel healthy and strong and have eaten enough, etc. Number 20, we're almost finished, so if we can just take another 2 or 3 minutes for these very important paragraphs. Number 20 is quite powerful. Here is a guarantee from the Rambam that he says that if you follow all the advice that I have just given you in these above 19 paragraphs, I guarantee you that you will be healthy. Whoever conducts himself in these ways, that we've just taught, I guarantee that he will not become ill throughout his life. He will grow old naturally, and die naturally. Sorry, doctors, you're going to be out of business, says the Rambam. If everybody eats according to the way I've written in this paragraph, then unfortunately the doctors and the medical aid and all of those people will have to find a different way to make a living. And he says, look, it's quite powerful. There's a guarantee here. I guarantee that his body will remain intact and healthy throughout his life. There is a disclaimer here. The Rambam has to put some small writing there because he doesn't want to get sued by your life insurance company that underwrote you because Maimonides said it would all work out well. So he says one may only rely on this guarantee if his body was not impaired from birth, and he was accustomed to a harmful habit from birth, or if there is a plague or drought in the world. If those exceptional circumstances should occur, says the Rambam, then I cannot guarantee that the healthy behavior, diet, nutrition, sleep, etc. that I've described will be good. But other than that, if you take the plague and the drought out, I wonder if corona is considered a plague for this definition. If you take all this stuff out and harmful habits from birth, following all this advice will bring you to the good stuff. In number 21, the Rambam says everybody is different. These beneficial habits are applied to a healthy person. But the most important part of paragraph 21 is after the first big paragraph, look at the little line there. Any change was something I wanted just to highlight. Each of these must choose midway through that paragraph different patterns of behavior in accordance with his illness as it is explained in medical literature. So in other words, you do sometimes need a doctor no matter what you do because people are different. That 21 ends off talking about routine. Any change from the conduct which one normally follows is the beginning of sickness. The importance of routine. Number 22, second last halacha, if there's no doctor available, neither a healthy or sick man should budge from all the directions given in this chapter, for each of them ultimately brings to a beneficial result. It's not a good idea if you live in a town and there's no doctor. But if there isn't, at least the one thing you can do is make sure to look after yourself according to everything I have recommended, says the Rambam. And number 23, on the subject of having a doctor in town, the Rambam lists out, and this is going to be our last paragraph of the day, the Rambam lists out 10 things that you have to have in a town. A Torah sage is not permitted to live in a community which does not have the following. In Hebrew, Kol Irsha Ein Bo Asara Dvarim Eilu and Talmid Chacham Rashai Ladur B'Seicha. A pious Torah sage should not live in a place that doesn't have these. And here's the list. A doctor, a bloodletter. We said bloodletting was very important kind of health therapy. A bathhouse, as we mentioned. A latrine, proper sewage systems. They say that when proper sewage and toilet systems were introduced, whenever it was, 70, 80, 90 years ago, I think the proper ones as we have today is at 100, that a lot of disease and illness was reduced in the world. An available source of good water, a river, spring, a synagogue, there's got to be a shul, a teacher of children, a scribe, that's for your tefillin, mezuzahs, and torahs, a charity supervisor, gabbai, tzedakah, a rabbinical court, empowered to impose corporal punishment and jail sentences. You need a beth din that can impose the law when there are disputes, etc., etc. So these 10 things are vital to have in the city. So that concludes chapter number 4. And what we learned in chapter number 4 is the Rambam's view on how we eat and etc., etc., how we sleep, the amount of sleep and eat, etc., that we need. So I'm going to stop the share. That concludes the formal shiur. If anybody wants to remain with any questions, with the greatest of pleasure. But please unmute yourself if you'd like to discuss anything or ask anything. And thanks so much for coming, all those that came.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Very interesting shiur today.
Yeah, you packed quite a lot into one paragraph there.
Well done
Wish
for
we could
packing
have
it all in
time.
30 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm scared to go and have lunch now.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Me too.
But at least I know there's some grapes in the fridge. The grapes seem to be okay.
Yeah, the grapes seem to be okay, eh? The biltong wasn't, but the grapes seem to be okay.
Rabbi.
Okay.
Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care. Take care, everybody.
Cheers, John.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Wishing everybody a good day, and thanks so much for
Thanks,
joining
Rabbi.
us. 1 o'clock tomorrow with my colleague.